This is our second shir on Basi Legani Tafshin Yutes. This is, of course, before Yud Shvat Tafshin Ayin Tes. So it's 60 years ago since the Rebbe said this Maamar, which means then the Rebbe was learning Basi Legani the first time, and the focus was on perek Tes. And we are learning Basi Legani for the fourth time and focusing on perek Tes. So the shir is in Basi Legani Tafshin Yutes. The first shir that I gave, the last shir, was a very long introduction. And we also studied Perek Aleph, which is the review of the first 8 perakim, and then Perek Vav. And what did we discuss? That you build a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you build a house for Hashem by engaging with and overcoming the world. And the Eskafia V'Eshapcha, the overcoming the world, is demonstrated with 3 different examples. The first is karbones. The second is the transformation of shtus d'liyumazeh into shtus d'gdusha. And the third is the transformation of the word sheker into keresh. The difference between these 3 explanations is that in the first explanation, the idea of transforming a carbon is not in the word carbon, but in the actual animal of the carbon. In the second idea, which is the transformation of shtus d'liyumazeh to the shtus d'gdusha, it's actually in the word shitim. I'd say shitim, the word shitim in shtus has to be transformed to shtus d'gdusha. And the third explanation, which is the transformation of sheker into keresh, it goes down to oisius. He translates separately the letter shin, the letter kuf, and the letter reish. And he proposes, based on Isaiah, that kuf and reish are asfend is chazion al sitra achara inun, sitra bisha inin, that the kuf and the reish, which are the opposite of the hey and the dal, they're oisius of klipa, and they need to be transformed into Kedusha. So the Rebbe taught us in Perek Vav of this Maamar the idea of Ga'ar Chayas Kone. That Kone is Kuf, which is Klipa, and you have to cut off the left leg of the Kuf and make it into a Hine, which is an Ois of Kedusha. So in the middle of Perek Tes, the Frierdiker Rebbe in his Maamar brings this idea of Ga'ar Chayas Kone, and that marks the end of the sugya of the transformation of kuf and reish from asius of la'umazev, asius of bisha, to a hey and a dalid, which are asius of kedusha. Or in a different way, as it's written in the earlier perakim and the earlier Maamarim, that it's to sustain the letters kuf and reish, but instead of it being sheker, it becomes keresh and kesher. That the oisius are continued to be used, but instead of being oisius of la'umazeh, they become oisius of kedusha, oisius of the Beis HaMikdash. And one of the points that Rebbe made was that when you cut off the left leg of the kuf now stands on 2 feet, and by the kuf standing on 2 feet, it has a firmness to it, a certitude. It's not limping. It's not hopping along. And this shows on a certain certainty. And therefore, the Rebbe continues. After he explains the idea of Gar Chayas Kone, cutting off the left leg of the kuf, so that the kuf becomes a hey, and Kone becomes hine, which is in Yonim of Gedusha, he discusses the word Amida. Why does he discuss the word Amida? This is today's shir, Perek Beis. Why does he discuss the word Amida? Because the discussion started in Perek Vav with Vasisa, krashim la mishkan atzei shitim eimdim, that they make krashim boards for the mishkan, and of atzei shitim eimdim that are standing upright. And the Rebbe argues that when the oisius of keresh are klipa oisius, it doesn't stand well. And standing is very important, as you're going to see soon. And when the oisius of keresh are healed and corrected, either by being transformed into different letters, or even if they remain the same letters, but they're transformed from how these letters are oisius of klipa, sheker, to how these letters are asius of kedusha, keresh, and kesher. So then there is the inyan from krashim eimdim, that they're standing upright and with a firmness and with a certitude. So this is where we're going to begin now. I just want to repeat one more time that the perek of the Frierdiker, the perek Tes, which is actually quite a short perek, starts off with the idea of atzei shitim eimdim, and it finishes again with atzei shitim oimdim, And in the middle, you have the idea of gar chayes kone. In other words, the cutting off of the left leg of the kuf, which I explained to you is the end of the sugya of the transformation of sheker to keresh. So the way I taught it to you, this brings to the idea of krashim aimdim, the opposite of klipas kedusha, and kedusha is the krashim are standing upright. But the way the Frierdiker Rebbe presents it, first he begins to speak about krashim aimdim. He goes off to talk about gar chayes kone, and he comes back to krashim aimdim, which is how the Maamar that we have in front of us is ordered. That's the arrangement in the Maamar. We cheated, and we learned perek aleph, which is a review of the first 8 perakim, and we jumped to perek vav, which explains the idea of gar chayes kone, the correction of the kuf, making it into a hay, so that it should be oimdim, it should stand. And we're now prepared to discuss the idea of atzeshitim oimdim. And of course, what's the idea? Hashem has a Beis HaMikdash. And one of the features of the Beis HaMikdash is that it's krashim oimdim, the boards of the Beis HaMikdash are standing upright. And the krashim oimdim come from what? The krashim oimdim come from the transformation of klipa into kedusha. To build the Beis HaMikdash, you have to have atzeshitim, which is taking shtuz de liyumaz and making it into shtuz de kedusha. And it becomes krashim instead of sheker. The lie of Elam Hazeh becomes a board for the Beis HaMikdash. And when the lie of Elam Hazeh and the shtuz de liyum hazeh become shtuz de kedusha and a board for the Beis HaMikdash, it's called krashim aimdim. So first of all, the idea of keresh and kesher is a good thing. It's a holy thing. It's a positive thing. When you change over, when you struggle with, and you transform klipa into kedusha, that's a good thing. But the reward, the dividend, the specific inyan that comes out from transforming sheker into keresh and shtuz de liumaz and the shtuz de kedusha is the inyan of amida. And this is how perek beis of our Maamar begins, the Rebbe's Maamar, which of course is based on the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maamar in the beginning. V'hinei, v'haMaamar b'siftas. I'm reading it inside, page Samachay. If you have this, I think is from Melukot. I made my copies of Melukot, but you can get them either in Sefer Maamar Basi Legani or Sefer Maamar Melukot. v'haMaamar b'siftas mavayir. Chapter 9 begins. Shezehu, that the idea that you've transformed klipa into kedusha, from shtuz to shtuz to kedusha, and from sheker to keresh, the result of that is, the reward for that is, gamkein masha krashim nikroyim b'shem imdim. That what was before sheker, that's now keresh, is able to stand up. Meaning to say, so long as it's sheker ein lei raglayim. Long as it's a lie, sheker can't stand. Right? The Rebbe brings the Maamar, kushta koi, emes stands. Sheker ein lei raglayim, sheker has no feet. But when you transform sheker into klipa, however you do it, whether you change the ACS, gar chayes kone, or you retain the ACS but you rearrange them that they become ACS of kedusha, rather than ACS of klipa, so now it can stand. So krashim means the sheker becomes keresh, and not only is it a good thing that the sheker becomes keresh, but the consequence of this good thing, that from sheker you have keresh, is that the mile of amida, that is standing upright. Or K'meisha Kasu, it's brought in the pasuk, Vasisa sakrashim la mishkan. That when the Eibishter commanded Moshe Rabbeinu to command the Jewish people to build the boards for the Beis HaMikdash, they called atzei shitim. They're made from boards of shitim, which of course was prakim gimel dal and hey, shtuz de umaz and shtuz de kedusha, and then aim them. They're standing upright. Now, before we continue, I just want to share a basic idea. When you learn in Chassidus, basically this Maamar and this Maamar and this Maamar, about the variety of different positions that a human being could be in, you have laying and you have sitting and you have standing and you have walking and you have jumping and you have broad jumping. It's all different levels. And each one is a different Maamar d'Matzah, yeah? Laying down is the lowest level, or as the Rebbe says in once in the Fabrengen edition of Nun Beis, the highest level. Sitting down, of course, is better than laying down, and standing is better than sitting down. Because when one is sitting, the higher parts of the body are lowered, the head has been lowered. And when people would sit, they'd put their legs up on a footstool, which means the legs would be raised above the ground. And when a person stands, the head is higher up and the feet is lower down. So the phenomenon of Amida, the idea of standing, in Kedusha means standing from a very high place to a very low place. Because the head is in the heavens, therefore the feet are planted firmly on the ground. We also have, of course, the idea which is brought in Chassidus, Chai Havaya Sheramadati Lafonav, that the idea of standing upright denotes, it indicates a bittul in front of the Eibishter, in front of whom one stands. So the effect of transforming atzei shitim into krashim, the effect of transforming sheker into keresh is as if the Ma'ila of Amida. And the Rebbe says, Umavayir, and the Rebbe Rayatz explains, the aimdim hunyan amudim, the notion of amudim, aimdim of standing means amudim. Amudim can mean columns, that means poles, and amudim could mean beams, like beams of light. They're both included in the same word, because that's what an amud means. An amud means a column that holds a building's ceiling up, and amud means a beam of light which shines from one place to another. And you'll see momentarily that the word krashim oimdim, atzei shitim oimdim, is going to be interpreted in both ways. It means a column, a beam which holds up a floor, a ceiling, and it means a beam of light which shines from heaven to earth. Because asvan the word oimdim and the word amudim is the same letters. The letters are just rearranged. You move the vav from before the mem to after the mem. Instead of being a verb, it becomes a noun. The noun of columns or pillars or beams. It says in Gemara, that mean, in other words, that these boards of shitim are standing upright. The aimdim hunyan ma'amidim, it's making the Mishkan stand. So just like aimdim means ma'amidim, so ma'amidim means aimdim, standing upright. And the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, explains in the Maamar Basi Legani in perek tes, asher inyan ha'amud, the purpose of a beam or a column is shu mechaber es agag v'haritzpa. It joins together the roof and the floor, right? If you have a building and you're talking at a time that they didn't have technology like steel, which can create very, very strong materials that can support very large ceilings, and they had not yet developed the arch and the keystone, which would allow for very large domes to accommodate very large rooms. So if you built a room of a considerable size, it was full of poles, columns. You have a big, big room, but the room was constantly interspersed with poles pushed to keep up the ceiling. So mechagag agag, but of course in keeping up the ceiling, there's two things. It keeps the ceiling above the floor, and it keeps the ceiling in relationship with the floor. In other words, it should have some relation. It shouldn't just be completely removed from the floor, but has a connection to the floor. It makes up one construct: the building, the floor, the ceiling, and the columns. It says the Rebbe the same is true the krashim of the Beis HaMikdash, which was the transformation of sheker, had the influence in Ikram B'Shem Amudim, that these krashim were standing upright as columns or as beams. And then the Friedrich Rebbe says, the krashim, which are columns or beams, are similar to mitzvos, because mitzvos are also called amudei, beams or columns of light. In Kabbalah, the mitzvahs are called columns. Why are mitzvahs called columns? They draw down and they bind and say they connect themselves with the worlds mamish. So mitzvahs are called amudim. This is called tarach amudei, the 620 mitzvahs, the 620 columns or beams that bring godliness from heaven to earth. And he says in Igama Krashim, the same is true of these boards, which are the building blocks of the Beis HaMikdash, that come from the and the transformation of the Klipa to create the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Rebbe, they have a similar property to mitzvahs per se. They connect godliness with the worlds. So, when you transform klipa into kedusha, sheker into keresh, you have an amud, you have something which is standing, which is makasher agag imaritzpa, and it's very similar to mitzvahs which have a similar purpose. And the Rebbe makes reference. This is, of course, Eger Zakei Simon Chav Tes, Tanya, the 29th letter, where the Alter Rebbe discusses the idea of mitzvahs. And he says basically mitzvahs come from the highest level. They come from Ratzon, which is above Chochmah, and yet they descend to the lowest place. And the mashal that he uses to try and describe how a mitzvah is like Ratzon, which starts in the highest levels and comes down to the lowest levels, is like an amud, like a column, like a beam. Mitzvahs are also compared to columns, as they state in Kabbalah. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, what does it mean that mitzvahs are columns? The The will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes from Kesed. The Isa, I'm turning the page Samach Vav now. The Isa, B'tfilah, so the Chunya Ben HaKona is written in the davening, the Tfilah of Chunya Ben HaKona. Asher b'ha-Kesed, yesh b'terach amud. Kesed has 620 pillars, or columns, of light, beams of light, which are the source of 620 mitzvahs. And he explains, just like there would be columns or beams in a gigantic estate. Bayis Chema means a walled or a fortified estate. Standing on the ground, and the top is connected to the roof and holding up the roof or the ceiling. The same is true of mitzvahs that nitzav v'midomamailas. They are standing from the highest of levels. In other words, they begin in the highest of the high. They draw down until the earth. In other words, mitzvahs, they have the highest source, and they're manifest in physical rituals and physical behaviors and physical materials, physical artifacts. And even those collection of mitzvahs which are not physical, but they're given to a physical person. It's 5 lines from the top of page Samach Vav now. Shahu bal bechira, that this physical person has free will, to lean his heart either to go to bed and so forth. So the Rebbe says there's a corollary made between krashim and mitzvahs are called AMUD. The beams of the Beis HaMikdash, which comes from the transformation of Klipa and the Kedusha, is called Oimdim. Mitzvahs are called Oimdim, and what they share is that they connect the highest level to the lowest level. Now, as I told you earlier, in connecting, in calling, translating the word AMUD, there's 2 basic ideas, right? A beam of light is also an AMUD, and a pole that holds up a ceiling is also called an AMUD. But there's a huge difference between how a beam of light is called an AMUD and how a column which holds up a building is called an AMUD. And the Rebbe is going to now address this difference. And we're going to find it's going to be a little bit complicated. What's going to emerge is that mitzvahs are compared to columns, beams, that stand on the ground and hold up the ceiling from the bottom up. Krashim are going to come to represent a spiritual idea. And the spiritual idea of krashim is going to be like a beam of light which shines from heaven to earth. And as the Maamar unfolds, you will see that the Rebbe is going to argue that the beam of light which descends from a higher level to a lower level is not as high as the physical column, which is what mitzvahs are compared to, that stands on the ground and reaches up to the heights of heaven. But this is what's going to happen. We're going to be comparing mitzvahs to krashim. And in comparing mitzvahs to krashim, we're going to be introduced to 2 kinds of beams or columns. And mitzvahs are going to be from the bottom up. Krashim are going to be from the top down. And the Rebbe is going to argue that the mitzvahs, which are from the bottom up, is a deeper level, a higher level than the beam of light, which is from the top down. Let's read. V'hine. I'm 5 lines into page Samach Vav. If you examine the exact language of the Frierdiker Rebbe, you'll see the whole point of the previous Rebbe in bringing krashim aimdim is that when you transform shaker into keresh, you get the ma'ila of amida, of standing upright. But then he says it's al derech in mitzvahs. It's comparable to mitzvahs. So the Rebbe's argument that the word al derech means similar to, but not identical with, mitzvahs. He's manipulating, he's emphasizing the word al derech and making an argument for the purpose of drawing a distinction. When it's written in the Maamar, that the columns of the Mishkan are only like mitzvahs, parenthesis, al derech v'dugma levad, it's simply comparable, it's a corollary, but it's not identical. Why? The mitzvahs are actual columns. And when the Frierdiker Rebbe compares the krashim to mitzvahs, he's saying they're not mamish mitzvahs, which means they're not mamish amudim, they're only comparable to amudim. And again, as I told you earlier, the mitzvahs are going to be compared to actual columns and poles, and krashim are going to be compared to beams of light. And the proof for this idea that the krashim is only al derech mitzvahs, and mitzvahs are mamish amudim, is in the language that's used in the Maamar. Mitzvahs, when he talks about mitzvahs being a beam, he uses two expressions. Haloshen mamshichem u'mechabrim. They draw down and connect. And these two expressions, mamshichem u'mechabrim, means that it's an amud mamish, like a beam that stands on the ground and reaches up into the heavens. By the krashim, it doesn't say he brings down, only connecting Eidin Seifim ha'elames, and therefore he argues it's only al derech mitzvahs, it's not mitzvahs mamish. So we have one word, amudim, and when it comes to mitzvahs, amudim means beams, and when it comes to krashim, amudim means beams of light. And this is how he explains it. V'hinei. B'tanya yesh gam kein hefresh ben hamoshel da'amudim la'nimshel lemitzvahs. In Tanya also, when in Igeres HaKedesh Chavtes, he's trying to explain the idea of mitzvahs coming from Ratzon Ha'elyon, the whole thing that you have to have the safe darga saying safe, should be able to ramshach atzmus lamata, which is in Ratzon, which is considered safe lagabe tainug. I mean, the whole Maamar Alter Rebbe, where he explains why mitzvah compared to beams. But in the marshal, the idea is that the beam is coming from a high place to a low place. And he says like this: there's a difference in marshal and nimshal. How? The be'inyan ha'amudim, when he talks about the physical beams, he says they're standing on the ground. And they reach up into the heavens till the ceiling, till the sky. The mitzvahs, and in as much as he compares beams, poles, to mitzvahs, it's the other way around. They begin on high, they descend below. Now, this is tricky. Why is it tricky? Because in Tanya you have a mashal of a beam standing on the ground and going up into the heavens, and a nimshal of mitzvah which is coming from heaven to earth. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, is going to take these two aspects from the Igeres HaKedesh and apply them to mitzvahs and krashim, but backwards. Mitzvahs are going to become like the mashal in Tanya, the beam that stands on the ground and the height is in the heavens. And krashim is going to become like the nimshal in the Tanya, which is mitzvahs, which is a beam from heaven to earth. And in Tanya, a mitzvah is malmayla lamata, and in this Maamar, a mitzvah is like an amud, which is malmata lamayla. But we're going to leave it alone. V'hinei, shine hamoshal ma'animshal moving b'pashtus. When you use an example from something physical and you want to explain it in correlation with something spiritual, obviously there's going to be differences and it's going to make sense. V'hinei, ha'amudim, when you talk about physical beams, physical poles that hold up a ceiling, Hare, it's obvious that they start on the ground. This makes them allowed to go up to the heavens. Why? Simple. There's gravity. It's very simple. It's gravity. Everything has a nature to go to the lowest possible level of energy. So when you have a heavy physical thing that's going to lay as close to the ground as possible, you want it to climb up into the heavens. To support the ceiling, you pile a rock on a rock or a ring on a ring until you have an amud from the bottom up. Mitzvahs. They begin on high. Like it says in the Pasuk, mitzvahs start out as spiritual and in the heavens. And from there they come down into this world. Now there's no question in my mind that in the way the Rebbe is learning Igeres HaKedesh here, and mitzvahs that come from heaven to earth, is because he's dealing with the ruchnius of mitzvahs, the spirituality of a mitzvah, the light of the mitzvah, the holiness of the mitzvah, the meaning of a mitzvah. He says mitzvahs start on a higher level and come down to a lower level. Continues the Rebbe and he says, Umatim la'klal hayadua. This illusion, this mashal, this nimshal, of a beam and a mitzvah, and the beam is from earth to heaven, and the mitzvah is from heaven to earth, this is consistent with a philosophical idea which is brought occasionally in Chassidus. What is that? Sheyesh hefesh ben Yesed lamata li Yesed lamayla. Yesed means the foundation. And in lower madreges, in Ishtalshalos, the Yesed is lamata, the foundation is underneath the building. In higher madreges, or higher than Ishtalshalos, the Yesed is lamal, the foundation is above the building. L'mashal, in Atzilus, Malchus, the lowest sphere, that's the Yesed of Atzilus. In Elam is saying safe, it's the other way around. And certainly physically, the foundation of building is underground or underneath the ground, and the building is built on top of it. And in Ruchni, it's the other way around. In other words, as I told you before, in Gashmias, the word that you would use to translate Amud means a beam. In Ruchnias, the word that you would use to translate Amud means a beam of light, because it's coming from heaven to earth. Shalamata, in the physical world. Hayesei to lamata of all of nivne habinyan. The foundation is underneath and the building is built on top of it. Ulamaila, and on high, it's punkfaket. It's the other way around. Hayesei to lamaila mehabinyan. The foundation is above the building. In other words, the source and the essence is above, and then the expression radiates from it, from a higher level to a lower level. And therefore, when it comes to beams, it says, is standing on the ground. This is their firmness. This is their firmament. This is their safety. This is their certitude. The needs of David, because standing means its firmness, its strength. On this lowest of levels, we say that the strength and the foundation of everything is lamata ba'aretz, is what's on the ground or closest to the ground. V'olav nivne habinyan. On this the building is built. Binyan mitzvos. Now remember, we're turning now still against the Kedesh Chavtas. When it comes to mitzvahs, he says, faket. Shem nitzavim berum hamaylis. The mitzvah starts out on the highest of the spiritual levels. Lefi shelamayla, because in ruchnius, harichezich v'yisei David, the strength and the foundation of everything is lamayla, is on a higher level. So when we finish Perek Beis, this is the conclusion we reach. And of course, this conclusion is not what's negated to this Maamar, it's what's negated in Tanya Negeres HaKedesh. That a physical beam is on the ground, that's where its strength lies, and it climbs up into the heavens. And a spiritual mitzvah's strength is in the heavens, and its light radiates from there like a beam which coming from a higher level to a lower level. Now what's going to happen in this Maamar? In this Maamar we're going to do an about face, we're going to do a switch. Because according to what we said so far, mitzvahs amul maila lamata. And in Perek Gimel, the Rebbe is going to switch it around and say mitzvahs amul mata lamayla and krashim, which are amudim, is mul maila lamata. Gimel, Amma. Zeh gufa tzarech lahaven. The question now becomes, why in all the spiritual worlds is the foundation above? And in the physical world, the foundation is below. And it's a very simple question. What's the question? The question is, we know that everything comes from heaven to earth. Before there was a world, there was God. Before there was Atzilus, there was Ein Sof. Before there was Bria, there was Atzilus. Before there was Asiyah, there was Yetzirah, and so on. Everything comes in a direction from a higher level to a lower level. This world, this earth, is the lowest level. It's the bottom of the pile. Right? In Tanya Perek Lamed Vav. Tachten, Shein Tachten, Lamata Mimenu, and Ian Hester, Panam Yizbarach. Right? This can't be a lower world. And in every world, when you describe a beam, when you describe a foundation, which is the source of a beam, the foundation means the source. The Eibush is the foundation of the world, and then the beam radiates from that foundation earthward. In every single spiritual world, the concept of an AMUD, which of course spiritually means a beam of light, its foundation, its beginning is higher, and its radiation and its manifestation is lower. So the Rebbe says, I don't understand. In the whole Seder Ishtalshalus, the phenomenon of an AMUD is Yesed L'mayla D'amshochet L'mata Himenu. When it comes to the physical world, everything is upside down. The beam sits on the ground and it climbs up into the heavens. Now, of course, we all understand why. It's called gravity. It's very simple, right? A physical beam, it's the safest, it's the securest, closest to the ground, and then it climbs up into the heavens. But the Rebbe says everything that exists physically has a spiritual significance, meaning insight, background, undercurrent. So Haguf Akasha, why is it? Of course, in other words, we understand that everything that happens physically comes according to the Ratzon of the Eibishter. The fact that the Eibishter made a law that says gravity, which is the basis for the idea that something which is closest to the ground is going to be the most secure and the most safe, and the further from the ground you're going to be more precarious and less safe. Which explains why down here the Yesod, the foundation, is going to be on the lowest level. And then the building is going to be built on top of it. But we know as a rule that the foundation is the source. So what is the spiritual reason for why it is that physically the foundation is underneath the building and spiritually the foundation is always above the building? In other words, this is not a physical kasha, it's a philosophical kasha, it's a theological kasha. Everything that happens is b'hashgacha pratis. And everything that happens is ratzon elyon. If the Eibishter wanted, he could have made on the physical earth also a beam dangles in the sky and it comes down earthward. Why did he make Dafka in this world the different than all the other worlds? So the Rebbe's kasha, let's read again the beginning. Omnam, And the question becomes, in all of Seder Ishtalshus, in all the spiritual worlds, the foundation is before the building. So how come down here the foundation is below it? In the spiritual world, every beam of light comes from a source. The source is higher than the beam, and that's the Yesod. Physically, a physical column sits on the ground. The Yesod is the ground, and it climbs up into the heavens. Why is it distinct and different? Now the answer is because the physical world is connected to atzmus. The spiritual world is connected to Giluyim. The physical world is connected to atzmus. So in the spiritual world, which is connected to Giluyim, what is higher is lower than what is lower. So therefore the beam comes from heaven to earth. The foundation is above. But in the physical world, which is connected to atzmus, atzmus is dafke in the geshem, in the physical thing. So actually what's lower has a higher source. The physical earth, the physical yesod is mushash and atzmus more than the beam that climbs heavenwards. So for the very same reason that in all the spiritual worlds, a beam has its yesed lamaila, because every light comes from a higher level to a lower level. For the very same reason, on earth, a beam has its yesed lamata, because lamata is atzmus. And atzmus is higher than giloyim. That's going to be the Rebbe's teretz. Let's learn it inside. Yuvan said the teretz is api hamavur b'kama in yonim. This is discussed in various places and in various contexts in Chassidus. Umehem, and one of them is be'inyan yesh hanivra. All of us know that Eibishter creates a world, and the creation is called bria, and there's a distinct creation which is called yesh hanivra. A creation which is not only a mitzias, which means a form or an existence, but a yesh. A yesh means an independent existence. In order for a creature, for a creation, to perceive itself as yesh, as independent, which means it doesn't need a Kadosh Baruch Hu, there has to be what's called helem vehester haboirei mehanivra. Hashem has to hide completely from the creation in order for the creation to perceive itself as a yesh. It's called yesh hanivra. And the Rebbe says that the yeshus of a nivra is mushush and the yeshus of atzmus amuz. The fact that a yesh, a physical creation, is independent. Independent means he doesn't perceive any need for anything but itself. In a way, there is there's no conscious, there's no experienced cause and source. The reason is it's created from atzmus amuz, the Eibishter himself. And the Eibishter himself is also yesh. Why is there a yesh down here? Because it comes from the yesh of Hashem. And again, the meaning of the word yesh is independent being. The difference is only the yesh of this world. The Reb Marash calls it in a Maamar sheker gomer. It's really a big lie. And the yesh of the Eibishter is called yesh ha'amiti, the true yesh. And yes, the true yesh of the Eibishter, the true ego of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was the source of the yesh hanivra. That the Eibishter is mitzvos me'atzmus. His existence is only from himself. In other words, he has no dependency. There's no cause, direct or indirect, which comes before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And because Hashem is a yesh, therefore he's able to create yesh. Derakhu, levade, he alone, he has the strength and the possibility, lahaves, to create yesh, an independent existence, me'ayin. Me'ayin literally means nothing, and figuratively means, me'ayin means from an unknown source, like bitmiyah, me'ayin lashon bitmiyah. The world exists as a separate entity because you don't see its source, me'ayin from total nothingness. So the Rebbe says, in all of Ishtalshalos, the Yesed is Lamaila. Why? Because when you're talking about Giluyim, light, the closer it is to the source, the higher it is. In Gashmias, the Yesed is Lamata. Why? Because the Maila of Lamata is Yeshus. Yeshus is Mushash and Atzmus. And here it's the other way around. The lower it is, the more of a Yesh it is, and therefore the more it's Mushash and Atzmus. So it's actually consistent for the same reason that in all the spiritual worlds, the AMUD is a beam which shines from heaven to earth, and the Yesed is higher than the AMUD. It's for the very same reason that Lamata, the Yesed is lower than the AMUD, and the AMUD climbs up from it. Because just like Lamaila, the AMUD comes from the Yesod, which is above it. So Lamata, the AMUD comes from the Yesod, which is below it. That's why it says, "My Mashiach is going to come. We're going to see the truth of all of creation. So it says in the Maamar of the Rebbe Marash, and you look at a physical yesh, and instead of seeing an independent, false sense of separateness and independence, you're going to look at the physical creation and you're going to see in its yeshus its true source. In other words, the truth of Hashem is ego, which has no cause and source. In other words, when you learn the Maamarim about the yeshus of this world, and you say to a Mashiach comes, the yesh is going to become bottled. There's two levels. On the lower level, the yesh is becoming bottled means the yesh becomes an ayah. The higher level is that the yesh hanivra becomes the yesh hamiti. In the physical world, you see the ego of atzmus ein sof. And what you discover then is that the ego of atzmus ein sof is only available in gashmis. It's not available in ruchnius. Because ruchnius is interdependent, ruchnius is connected, ruchnius is giluyim, and yeshus is the opposite of that. But the Yuvim, which explains the expression from Sefer Yetzirah, Machinot Chlasam B'Seif, in the beginning, which is the Eibishter himself, is planted in the end. Asher B'Seif on Dafka, the lowest level, which is the foundation, which is underneath the building. Noas Hatchila is planted at the very, very beginning. And the Rebbe says, Shulamaylam B'Chinas Reish, we're not going to discuss this. Asher Hatchila hu atzmus, that the Tchila, which is higher than Reish, goes on the Eibishter himself, and Nimtza B'Chinas HaSeif Dafke is found Dafke. In the end, in other words, by Yesha Gashmi, Shein Tachtan Lamata Mimenu, the physical being of independence that nothing is lower than it. Hinehu Dafke. Dafke, the physical Yesh, which is the biggest lie, will become Dira Latzmus Yizbarach, the seed for HaKadosh Baruch. Because if Hashem wants to reveal to us the truth of His Yesh HaMiti, He reveals that on the Yesh HaNivra. So the lowest thing is the kli for the highest revelation, which is atzmus amus. Ashala Osid, Yezeh Begilei, when Mashiach comes, it's going to be revealed, and then the Rebbe says, Emes Gam Machshav Keinu, it's really that way they say. Now we just don't see it. So the Rebbe concludes, V'zeh, now we understand, Hatam Ashalamata HaYesei to Lamata Dafke, that even though in all of Ishtalshalos, the foundation is higher than the beam, in Gashmias, the foundation is lower than the beam. That Yesh Asiya, which is the lowest, for all of Nivnu Elam Esalyin. What's the pshat? What's the havana? What's the insight? The insight is that the Yesod is higher than the binyan. But in Giluyim, the Yesod is higher than the binyan, it's above the binyan. A higher air is lower than a lower, higher than a lower air. And in Gashmias, the Yesod is below the binyan. In other words, the very lowest level of Gashmias is where atzmus is. And now the Rebbe said, Mash'enkein l'maylo, as opposed to on high. It says in Tanya, when you're talking about spiritual lights, you can never say about any level of spiritual life that that's the point, because it's only a radiation of a light which is even higher than it. And therefore, whatever light you're going to talk about, you're always going to say, bring me to its source. That's the pshat the Yesed is l'maylo. So why the Eibishter create Giluyim, which is it's tushlam. Al yodam, they become intermediates to see through the purpose. Hakavana. Hapnimius, which is lamata dafke. The spiritual worlds bring us to the physical world where the purpose of the Eibishter's creation is fulfilled. Milmata lamayla. Ve'er va'ar shalamayla yeser naila. Yeser. The light in a higher world is higher than the light in a lower world. Which is why, when you're talking about spirituality, the beam has a foundation which is above it, and it's beaming forward from a higher level to a lower level. The foundation and the firmament of this column or beam of light is lamayla, is in the spiritual world. There it comes below. So, in Ruchnius, the Yesed is higher and the beam is below it. In Gashmias, the Yesed is below it and the beam is above it. Why? Because in terms of Giluyim, the higher level has a higher light, the lower level has a lower light. And in terms of Atzmus, the lowest level has Atzmus Amud. Now, if you remember, this was compared to mitzvos and an AMUD. Now we're going to compare this to krashim and mitzvos. We're going to do it upside down. Mitzvos is going to become from the bottom up, and krashim is going to become from the top down. But we're going to skip Perek Dal. I'm hoping to do the mitzvah the next time, which is tomorrow, hopefully next year. We're going to go to Perek Hey. Okay? Now I am skipping Perek Dalet, because it's a tifa haskola about Ermaim Rakia. I don't want to rush it. What you need to know from what we skipped in Perek Dalet is that krashim oimdim is a beam that the Yesod is above and the light extends below. And mitzvos, tarach, amudei, the mitzvos are amudim which stand on the ground, which up into the heavens. Because even though in Perek Beis, the mitzvahs were a light which comes from heaven to earth. In this Maamar, mitzvahs are things that climb from earth to heaven, and the krashim is heaven to earth. So the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, is explaining the pasuk. V'asisa krashim lamishkan atzeshita meimdim. And of course, the first thing that you have to say again is that to make the building for the Eibush, you have to have iskafia v'ishapcha, which is the transformation of shtuz de li'ubad and the shtuz de gedusha, and from sheker into kedesh. And we transform the sheker into kedesh. You have the mile of amid, standing upright, it's standing this way, erect. Mitzvahs are also standing upright. And the Rebbe is going to argue that krashim aimdim is like beams of light, where the Yesod is lamaila. And mitzvahs aimdim is going to be like a column of a building where the foundation has been on, the building is on top of it. So krashim becomes a davar ruchni and mitzvah becomes a davar gashmi. Now I'm going to say something which I shouldn't say, and I really don't want to say it, but I've been thinking about it the whole shiur. Remember, I mentioned to you in the previous shiur that when the Friedrich Rebbe discussed this in his Maamar, the idea of dira b'tachteinim, Basi Legani, making the whole world a home, a garden for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through also mikdash v'shachanti b'seicha, making Hashem a sanctuary in which he'll live beyond the borders of the Beis HaMikdash, b'tei chalechad v'echad mi'Yisrael, and the whole world, and so on and so forth. I told you there's 2 points. The first point is building the Beis HaMikdash. And the second point is, once the Beis HaMikdash is built, to do the karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe says in other Maamar Basi Legani that the building of the Beis HaMikdash itself is done by tzaddikim. The karbanos brought in the Beis HaMikdash, once it's built, is done by us. So I'm just thinking out loud, that's all this is. That we have 2 ideas, and we have krashim and mitzvahs. Krashim is the Beis HaMikdash, and mitzvahs is what you do inside the Beis HaMikdash. So krashim, which is the Beis HaMikdash per se, we say that the Yesod is lamaila and the AMUD is lamata. It comes from heaven to earth. And once you have Beis HaMikdash, you build columns inside where the Yesod is lamata, and the mitzvahs are lamaila. This is the atzmus. So I'm just thinking out loud that perhaps this is the word. The Beis HaMikdash itself is an inyan ruchni, and the mitzvahs, so therefore Yesod lamaila and AMUD lamata. And the mitzvah doing the Beis HaMikdash is dvarim gashmi, dvarim atzmi, and that's why the Yesod is lamata and AMUD is lamaila. So let's learn Perek. Hey, and like I said, we're going to get back. Next shiur, Bali Neder, is going to be on Perek Dalet. Once we understand that there is a AMUD with a Yesod, a column and a foundation, and in Ruchnius, the Yesod is higher than the Binyan, the AMUD. And in Gashmis, the Yesod is lower than the AMUD, and both for the same reason. Because the Yesod is higher than the AMUD, and in Ruchnius, higher is better than lower. And in atzmus, lower is better than higher, which is why in Ruchnius, in krashim, the Yesod is lamayla, and the AMUD comes from it. And in Gashmius, mitzvahs, the Yesod is lamata, and the mitzvahs come from it. So the Rebbe now explains, Sha'krashim heim al derech b'vada mitzvahs. The beams of the Beis HaMikdash are only comparable to the Beis HaMikdash, but they're not the same thing. Which is why, by the krashim, which represent the building of the Beis HaMikdash, or as I'm proposing, the spiritual columns that bring godliness into the world, he only uses the word mechabrim and doesn't use the word mamshichim. He uses the word connect and not the word to draw down, like he explained in the bottom of page Samachay. When we explained above in Perek Dalet and the Prakim before, the work of the krashim which goes on the Beis HaMikdash itself is considered a spiritual service. Or like he explains about karbonis, that although a carbon is a physical avodah, the lashon from the Friedrich in his mind is achas havedes haruchnius ha'yeb mikdash hu yin karbonis. I'm almost sure that's the lashon in perek base haruchnius. Sha'adam tzarich laved ba'eish nefesh alikis. A person has to work with the spiritual faculties that he has, the fire of the godly soul, the fire of the animal soul. So there are ideas which have to do with the base of mikdash per se, which are really manifest, at least here, in a spiritual way. Now, what's a carbon? A carbon is a war between a person and an animal. And the person has a fire, and the animal has a fire, and these two fires meet, and they fire it out, so to speak. And the purpose is to take and to transform the fire of Ummah into the fire of Kedusha. So the idea that a carbon is like fire is completely ruchniistic. Like he explains, be'inyin avodas hakarbonos. When it comes to the service of karbonos, sha'odam tzarech laved be'eish nefesh alikis. A Jew serves Hashem with the fire of the divine soul. Shehu eish shelamayla sheba'adam. The divine soul's fire is a higher fire than the animal soul. Right? Obviously, it's a higher fire. Ube'eish the nefesh habahamis, and the fire of the animal soul. Shehu eish shel hedyet sheba'adam, which is the idea that fire comes from the person as opposed to coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a lower level. V'tzarech lavarer is a nefesh habamis. We have to bring clarity to the animal soul. Beprat yamad regesh habei, in all the specific types, like it says binyan sher kesef eis. This is in perek beis of the Maamar. So in as much as we're talking about karbonos, which is an aveda ruchnis, it's not about the physical manifestation, the physical world, but the spiritual significance behind it. Hine. Hagam shavei debel mazagashmi, even when one is bringing a carbon in the physical world. But in as much as the physical world is concerned, it's aveda ruchnis. Avo be'erech ela mazagufa, in as much as the physical world is concerned, that is aveda ruchnis or the aveda gashmi, is a carbon. And certainly the building of the Beis HaMikdash where the carbon is going to be brought is a spiritual avodah, not a physical avodah. Ve'ein zeh inyan asiya mamish. This is not yet the idea of actual asiya, parenthesis. She'emin mala asiya le'ed, that's brought in the Sfar that asiya is the main thing. Ve'ein zeh offer kasha. Ve'chad v'b'yetz, it's not hard and firm earth, which would create a good foundation, v'mezakt, but rather it's a ruchnius de kaved. Okay? So the Rebbe is trying to say, if I may use these oisias, when you do a mitzvah, there's the kavanah. The mitzvah is a physical thing, the kavanah is a spiritual thing. When you bring a carbon, there's a spiritual kavanah of the carbon. The spiritual kavanah of the carbon follows a pattern of malmayla lamata. The spirituality is higher and the material is lower. The physical ritual behavior of the carbon and the mitzvahs is from the bottom up, but the spirituality is from the top down. Ulazais, therefore. Okay, we did this. So I'm continuing now 8 lines from the bottom of page Samaches. This explains the Torah Samaches. I just want to say, Derech Agav, B'kitz and Imretz, that one of the features of Basi Legani from the very, very beginning was that Rebbe mentioned all the Rabbeim, beginning with the Alter Rebbe. In the very first Basi Legani in 1951, Tafshin Yerav, the Rebbe mentioned each one of the Rabbeim 5 times in the Maamar. He told 2 Teiros, he repeated 2 Teiros from each Rebbe, he said a story from each Rebbe. He just mentioned the names of each one of the Rabbeim, and he asked that they should sing a niggun of each one of the Rabbeim. Yud Shvat in Tafshin Yerav was Wednesday night. Shabbos, there was the first surprise farbrengen of the Rebbe's Nesiyas. And he said a short Maamar at Shabbos Baganim, and he mentioned the Maamar, the Baal Shem Tov, and the Maggid. And he said after the Maamar, that when he said the Maamar Basi Legani, he only started with the Alter Rebbe, because by his chasanet, when the Rebbe got married, the Friedrich Rebbe only started with the Alter Rebbe, not before. The Rebbe said to the Racha, and I thought it over, why should the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid not be included? So he said a second Maamar, Shabbos, and he mentioned the Torah of Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. And beginning with the following year, in every single Maamar of Basi Legani, he mentioned all the Rebbe in front of the Baal Shem Tov, and that's the significance of this quote here. And after Tashim Lamed, I believe he'd also mentioned his father. So he says, the Baal Shem Tov writes, the keresh hu ha'adam, the concept of a keresh, which is a physical board, which is representative of a spiritual idea, is the person. The idea is to connect the person, the world, with godliness. It says in Tikkun Ezer that a keresh is eser ames eirech hakadosh, that the height is 10 ames. This goes in the 10 spheres. Da sheyura the gufa da banash. That's the measure of the body of Elokus. Shahadam hu be'eser keichet, the person has 10 faculties. Zayimid is gimel meichin. And the Baal Shem Tov says that what's the union of Kedesh to connect the Eibishter in the world. That's the concept of the krashim. You start with the nefesh elokis, and it spills over into the nefesh habahamis. Last days me'advarim gashmi, to make from physical things shtuz deliyum things which are part of shtuz deliyum hazeh, or lahapcham the shtuz de gedusha, to make them the shtuz de gedusha. And as far as this model is concerned, the higher level, the spiritual level, is greater than the physical level. In as much as the krashim, the building of the Beis HaMikdash, and the kabbanos that are brought there, as opposed to other mitzvahs, is considered a spiritual thing. The say that is no ma'ala lamata, from heaven to earth. It doesn't bring down the Eibishter himself. Because light only comes from atzmus. And if you want to bring down atzmus itself, it's through a very physical and lowly avodah, which is mitzvahs begashmis, the performance of mitzvahs begashmis. So the Rebbe sort of quickly gets to the point. We're defining building the Beis HaMikdash as a spiritual thing. We're defining the doing of mitzvahs as a physical thing. So putting aside the questions whether the building the Beis HaMikdash can be considered spiritual or it mustn't be considered spiritual. But the point that he focused on is krashim eimdim. The board standing is a spiritual thing, which means the asayid is lamayla and the AMUD is lamata. Our physical performance of mitzvahs is the other way around. The asayid is lamata. The physical thing is the most important thing. And because of this difference, that when you're talking about a spiritual service, a spiritual engagement and involvement of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as described by krashim, so the seder is what's higher is closer to the Eibush than what's lower. But then you have mitzvahs, which is physical things, and physical things touch atzmus, and in as much as that's concerned, the lowest word is closest to atzmus amhus. And therefore, last line on page Samaches, B'ha-mitzvah, same in the Lashon Mamshich, mitzvah doesn't only say that it connects, it brings down. In other words, in a physical mitzvah, the Eibishter himself. Lefisha mitzvahs heim begashmi, as the mitzvahs are physical. And in that physical mitzvahs, you have atzmus and Hussein Sabbarach. As the Frierdiker Rebbe, whose Yartat is Yud Shvat, explains, Bekama, my Morim, and number my Morim, I'm in the Kazakh. This is Hamsha, I'm in the Kazakh. The Frierdiker Rebbe kochs in this idea, and the Rebbe repeated it. I remember I once heard it from the Rebbe. The Rebbe said many times. Even when one does a spiritual mitzvah, like an obligation of the heart. For example, Yediyas Hashem, to know the oneness, to know that Hashem is and to understand Hashem. Or Yediyas Ha'achtas, know the oneness of Hashem, or Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. So those are metaphysical mitzvahs, they're spiritual mitzvahs. Hariyatzivu behem, who the mitzvah is, sheyirgishu bebasar hagashmi b'meach v'lev, that a person should feel them in their physical flesh, in his brain, and his heart. Or kamei b'yira, for example, the mitzvah of fear, shetarachli is kivus, there has to be a squeezing of a kvetchkeit, a contracting b'meach v'lev hagashmi, the physical brain and the heart. That when a person gets emotional, they get excited, the heart pounds, or the heart becomes smaller as a symptom, as an effect of the emotion. When a person uses his mind, I remember the Rebbe describing it by Fabrengen, that the brain is in a brain case, is in a skull, which doesn't move, doesn't expand. But the more you use your brain, the more the matter, the brain stretches. But it doesn't have where to expand to, so it collapses on itself. And that's why your brain, which is used more, has physical wrinkles, has physical folds, because the brain matter stretches, becomes more physical brain matter, and because there's no way to expand outwards, it collapses inward. From one's contemplation and delving deeply understanding the Torah. So the Rebbe argues that every mitzvah needs a physical side. Most mitzvahs are physical mitzvahs. and they also have a spiritual side. Some mitzvahs are primarily spiritual, like Yediyas Hashem and Achtas Hashem and Emunas Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem and so forth. But they all need a physical aspect. And he continues. And to be sure, this is not only true of those couple of mitzvahs, that because they're chayvus halavavis, you have to come along and show what the physical aspect of it is, right? The Rebbe asked by Fabrengen, when a person loves Hashem, what physical mitzvah is he doing? And the Rebbe answered, his heart is pounding. When a person is learning about the Eibishter, learning about the unity of Hashem, what physical mitzvah is he doing? And the Rebbe said the mass of his brain is stretching. But this is only a few mitzvahs, that the mitzvah is primarily spiritual and has a physical aspect. Says the Rebbe is true of every mitzvah. How is that? Every mitzvah has the delight, the spiritual pleasure that comes from the mitzvah. In one service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So pleasure is a spiritual thing. But the spiritual pleasure is supposed to affect an increase in shamnunis, that means in richness, in fat. It's written in the pasuk, and of course it's explained in the Gemara. When a person hears good news, the bones expand physically, because tainug, pleasure, causes the body to physically expand. Of course, you know the Hayem Yem that the Friedrich Rebbe says that Reb Nachum Chernobyler was shaman begashmis begufim yamiras amen yesh meirab. He was physically fat from the pleasure of saying amen yesh meirab. His body. In other words, he had a spiritual pleasure that was so acute that it had a physical effect on his person. And the Rebbe is arguing that this is true of all of us. Shamnunis, gashmiis, bebasar agashmi. That what? That certain mitzvahs, most mitzvahs, are primarily a physical act and they come along with a spiritual aspect. Some mitzvahs are primarily a spiritual thing, and the Rebbe argues, that the Frierdiker Rebbe argues, that they have a physical effect as well. And then the Rebbe says all mitzvahs have a spiritual part, which is the pleasure of the mitzvah, the kavanah of the mitzvah, versus the physical part with the physical ritual. And these two ideas, the spirituality of the mitzvah and the physicality of the mitzvah, are both called amudim. They're both called beams. But one is a beam from the top down, like a beam of light. The spirituality of a mitzvah is more spiritual on a higher level than it is now. And the other is a beam. The physicality of the mitzvah is a beam which is laying on the ground, on the physical earth, because that's atzmus. And above atzmus, the ilmus halyenim only giluyim. So in each mitzvah, in every aspect of our Jewish life, there are two parts, two inyanim of an AMUD of ruchnius, which is shining milmaila lamata, which is represented by krashim eimdim, and the AMUD, which is milmata lamailo, which is represented by mitzvah saying. Now think about it. Think for a moment what the Rebbe is saying. We just spent 8 perakim explaining Eskafia v'Eshapcha, right? The struggle with Gashmias. And Eskafia v'Eshapcha is Aveda Sakarbonis, which he calls an Aveda Ruchnis, Shaiva Mikdash. The Eskafia v'Eshapcha, the transformation of Shtuz del Yumaz into Shtuz del Kedusha. The Eskafia v'Eshapcha, the transformation of Sheker into Keresh and Kesher. Says the Rebbe, you should know, taking Klipa, making it into Kedusha is Inyan Ruchni. It's spiritual. So if the transformation of Klipa into Kedusha is an Inyan Ruchni and is compared to Krashim, that are Amud, where the Yesed is Lamaila, the Binyan is Lamata, so where is it Fakert? The actual Asiyah of a mitzvah. The simple doing of a mitzvah, which is separate from the fight and the struggle which led up to doing that mitzvah. The physical mitzvah, this is an Amud, where the Yesed is Lamaila, the Binyan is Lamaila. The Yesed is Lamata and the Binyan is Lamaila. And that's what the Rebbe now says. I'm holding 7 lines on top of page Samachtes, which is in Perek Hey of this Maamar. This is what the Friedrich Rebbe is saying in the Maamar. When he compares krashim to mitzvahs, so our Rebbe comes along and says, don't get confused. When the Friedrich Rebbe compares krashim to mitzvahs, he's not comparing krashim to mitzvahs to say they are identical. He's comparing krashim to mitzvahs to say they're similar, that both of them are aimed in from a low level to a higher level. But actually they're not only different, but they're diametrically opposite. One is milmaila lamata, and the other is milmata lamaila. Maybe doing some mitzvahs, the krashim are like mitzvahs. When a person is doing a keresh, But a kedesh means the ruchnius of a mitzvah. Nimshach gamkin hagoveya goveya, it brings from a higher level to a lower level, like a column, which brings from a higher level to a lower level. Avalei hagoveya goveya b'yesa, not the highest level, mamish, which is atzmus. Ki'im b'hamitzvahs, only in the physical mitzvah itself. Bohem dafka nimshach hagoveya goveya b'yesa shu ha'atzmus. In the physical behavior of a mitzvah, you bring down the highest of the highest, that higher from this cannot be, which is atzmus. Zehu inyan ha-mitzvahs, which is the idea of a mitzvah. Shem dim shachem me ha-atzmus, they come from the Eibishter himself. U'mechaber me say baruch hu im ha'elames, they connect the Eibishter mamish with the world. So the kedesh would be the ruchnius of a mitzvah. The kedesh would even be the fight with the Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh HaBahamis, to overcome the klipa and do the mitzvah, any spiritual energy. And in the kedesh, the Yesod is Lamaila, and the AMUD is a beam which is shining from a higher level to a lower level. And because it's an AMUD, a beam, it's coming from a high place, but it's not Goveya Goveya B'Yeser. It's only Goveya Goveya. And then there's the physical act. The physical act, the dry physical act. The physical act is fakir, there's atzmus. And in atzmus, the Yesod is Lamaila, and the AMUD is Lamata. The Yesod is Lamata, and the AMUD is Lamaila. Says the Rebbe Vayadei, Shaha'adam Makayim es ha-mitzvahs. When a Yid does a mitzvah, he brings down both of these ideas of AMUD. The spiritual idea of AMUD, which is compared to Kedesh, where the Yesod is Lamaila and the AMUD is Lamata. And the physical idea of AMUD, which is compared to the mitzvah itself, where the Yesod is Lamata and the AMUD is Lamaila. And the Rebbe explains. And the Rebbe is going to say that when you do a mitzvah, before you do it physically, you have it spiritually. And perhaps he means, before the Eibusha gave us the Torah, the mitzvah was done by the Oves Beruchnias. And only when the Torah was given, can we do it also by Gashmis. Let's read it inside. Hine betchila, the line that begins with the word Es HaMitzvahs, which is 11 lines down on page 7. In the beginning, Hu mechaber esam im ha'elames. When a Yid does a mitzvah, he connects godliness with the world. Shu betchilas ha'avodah, which is the beginning of one's service. And what is the beginning of one's service? Ayedei aveda ruchnis, through a spiritual service. Shu avedas hakrashim. I guess what this means is anytime you do a mitzvah, there's a spiritual preparation. There's a focus, there's an engagement, there's a desire, there's a pleasure, and there's a fight with the Yetzer Hara and Nefesh HaBahamis. All of that is compared to krashim, it's all ruchnias. And any time you're dealing with ruchnias, the higher it is, the closer to the truth it is. And the lower it is, the farther from the truth it is. So the Yesod is Lamaila, and the AMUD, which means the beam of light, is beneath it. And that's the concept of krashim. But then he says, after the spiritual preparation, which is creating a spiritual beam of bringing light from heaven to earth to empower you to do a mitzvah, and then you actually physically do the mitzvah, then you connect it to the Eibishter himself. This is like we find in Torah itself. There's something called Torah. There's something called Kodesh Baruch Hu. Torah is Oir, Torah is Ruchnius, and Torah is Giluyim. And Torah has to be connected to the Eibishter himself, which is atzmus. Says the Rebbe, you can't go by mitzvahs. The same is true about a mitzvah. Before you actually do the mitzvah, there's a spirituality. Where is the spirituality? Bebirchas ha-mitzvahs, when you say the bracha on the mitzvah. And mitzvah was translated before. And they come down from a higher level to a lower level with Eibishter's great kindness. He draws them down on himself. He connects them to the world, which is in a spiritual exercise. But when you have the hachana to a mitzvah, the spirituality to the mitzvah, or the bracha of a mitzvah, which brings the godliness from heaven to earth, obviously heaven is higher than earth. And the source of the beam is the Yesod, which is Lamaila. But it's only Giluyim. Then when you physically perform the mitzvah, nods his head, which is Amshachas atzmus. Just like in Torah, there's the understanding of the Torah, and there's the God, which is hidden in the Torah. The same is true in mitzvahs. There's the understanding of the mitzvahs, and there is a God, which is in the mitzvah, which is the physical asiyah. V'chein b'teira, the same is true in Teira. Kadosh Baruch Hu Kedev V'shein Kenegdei. First, Hashem gives you a koyach, and then when you learn it, Hashem learns with you. Says the Rebbe, V'chein b'chol ha'inyanim. Anything you're going to touch, it's going to have these two ideas. Krashim eimdim and AMUD of mitzvos. Krashim eimdim comes first, to bringing a spiritual light from a higher level to a lower level as an inspiration. And then you're going to have the tarach AMUD, the physical mitzvah which comes as a result of this inspiration, where the Yesod is lamata, because that's atzmus. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Eisa midah keneged midah. Hashem does the same as we do, measure for measure. Whatever he tells us to do, he does himself. Like it says in the Maamar of Bar Mitzvah, yeah? When we do a mitzvah, we bring down the mitzvahs again from the Eibishter. Moreover, it's the renewal from atzmus. Like it says in Chassidus in the pasuk, we do mitzvahs, we create the mitzvahs. So, when a Yid does a mitzvah, so to speak, the Eibush is doing the mitzvah again. And again, I'm reminding you that the reason that I bring the Torah from the Magid is because he brings all the Rabbeim, including the Baal Shem Tov, which we had on the previous page, and now the Magid, that it says in the pasuk, a person should guard my edicts, and he should guard my judgments, and he should do the mitzvahs. So you have a shmartem, you have chukes and mishpatim and asiyim. And then v'chai b'hem, a person lives. Taiches the Mezitcha Magid. Chukei is machshava. The edict of Kadosh Baruch Hu is thought. What's the connection between the word chuka and thought? Because machshava is levush ha-meyuchad, which is eis ha-chakika. Chuka is the word chakika, machshava. Mishpatai is dibur. He brings it out because it says b'dvar melech shiltein and melech b'mishpat yamideretz. I'm not elaborating on this because I'm not elaborating on it. That chukim is machshava, and he brings a raya. Mishpatim is dibur, and he brings a raya. And obviously, ashyasa esam ha'adam unyan asiyah. Doing a mitzvah is the idea of action, shuatachlich, which is the point. So the Mezitcha Magid says, va'idei v'chai b'hem. The life, first you have a machshava, then you have a dibur, and then you have a maaseh, but life is an asiyah. The idea is b'machshava. When a person first does the Aveda of Machshava, and then he brings down this thought through speech. And then it comes down to a deed. The person lives. He brings a new life into the mitzvah. And I presume this means atzmus amhus. So the Rebbe says a very interesting thing. That in Yiddishkeit there's two inyanim. There's krashim meimdim and there's tarach AMUD. Krashim meimdim means the beam of spiritual light which comes from heaven to earth to inspire the mitzvah. And tarach AMUD means the actual performance of the mitzvah, which comes after. And the tarach AMUD, this is atzmus, with the Yesod is lamata, as opposed to the Yesod being lamayla. And he finishes out with krashim. This idea of krashim, it's a spiritual service. Which means, I'm saying again, that all these prakim, perek beis, which is about karbanis, which he says beferish, achas aveda ruchni shai b'mikdash. And then Gimel Dal and Hey about Shtus. And then Vav Zayin and Ches about Shekin into Keresh. It's all Ruchnias. The struggle of Yiddishkeit is still the spirituality of Yiddishkeit alone. And then you just do the mitzvah. And the doing of the mitzvah is not that challenging, but that's atzmus. This brings down the Eibishter himself, and he connects it with the worlds. The heaven and earth become one and the same thing. And the Rebbe repeats again the lashon that you have from the Rebbe Marash. Not that the yesh hanivri becomes ayin, but in the yesh hamiti you see that the yesh hanivri you see that the truth of the yesh hanivri is the yesh hamiti. So to be honest, this wasn't a very hard shiur. Right? We did a lot of reading. Yeah, we read all of Perek Beis, all of Perek Gimel, and all the Perek, which is approximately 3 pages. These are big pages with a lot of words. And the Teuchen is, and this is very interesting, the Rebbe is learning a Maamar from the Frierdiker Rebbe. When you read the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maamar, you see a correlation between krashim and mitzvos. And you assume that the point of the correlation is that they're the same. And the Rebbe comes along and says that when the Frierdiker Rebbe draws a correlation between krashim and mitzvos, the entire point is to draw a distinction They're similar, but not identical. And what's the essence of krashim? In other words, the whole iskafev is hapche. This whole business is al tzruchnius. And it doesn't come to the physical act of a mitzvah, which is atzmus. So first you have the ruchnius de AMUD, which is malmayla lamata. Then you have the gashmis de AMUD, which is malmata lamayla. Now, in the next shiur, we're going to be doing perek dalet, which is about ermaim rakia. And the way I understand it, I'm not fully prepared, but at the moment is, the word of the Rebbe is that there's two in Yarm and ermaim rakia. Just like there's krashim and mitzvos, and ermaim rakia and ruchnius. And in ermaim rakia and ruchnius, eir is higher than mayim is higher than rakia. And then there's ermaim rakia and atzmus, and that is fakert. Eir is less than mayim is less than rakia, and in the lashon harav, ukefi sheyizbaya lekama.